Hi, my name is Al Green. Not that one, but the struggling guy who was in the music industry for years trying to sell talent and songs to agents. The agents befriended me and taught me techniques that I want to pass on to you through my program, which is called You Can Talk, You Can Sell. Anyone who has ever taken this program has excelled in selling and either risen to the top of their company, their team, or the top of their field. It's called You Can Talk, You Can Sell, and you can get it right here. Do you know the secret to the highest salespeople and what they do differently, whether they're trained or they know it intrinsically? One of the things that is a big changing dynamic that you could use starting today is matching people to their tastes and desires. So in other words, when you have an understanding of what moves people, what turns them on, what is the one thing that you can recognize in them? For some people, it's money. Other people, it's prestige. And some people are already there that you need to sell to. I'm still dressed because I had a very early morning meeting with a CEO, and his CFO was there, about a consultation. And this was a person I couldn't get his time because of the fact he said, I have no time. I am busy from the time I start work until I go to bed at midnight. And so a question that I learned from a very skilled sales trainer years ago was, what are you doing in the morning? What time do you get up? What time do you have breakfast? And he told me he gets up about 5:30. And then he has breakfast, and then he's out at about 6:30. So I asked him, based on the training that I studied, if he would take the time to have breakfast with me at 6:30 so I could spend at least 20 minutes with him. And he agreed. I couldn't believe it. So we picked a hotel that had a very nice restaurant, and there we were at 6:30 this morning, with him and his CFO, and he brought the vice president with him. And this was a person who is the CEO of a company that was trading on the stock exchange. It was a big company. And what I wanted to do was basically impress upon him the need for his salespeople to make a change and get a little bit of training because of the fact that I had talked to them. And I could tell these were people that were pretty much, and I didn't want to say it in a negative way, but they were flying by the seat of their pants. They really didn't know quite the techniques of really working on a highly professional level. Now, we're not talking about stockbrokers. We're talking about business to business, and we're talking about people that are trying to make a living, and most of them had literally hit the 5-figure, close to the 6-figure income, which is very common these days. But because there are companies that still want people going door to door or business to business, selling one-on-one, there are companies out there with the entrepreneurs and the business owners who need salespeople. And as I said before, I could list thousands of jobs that are available for you today if you ever wanted to make the move. And it's very interesting because I did it years ago, and it was at the advice of another sales trainer. Why don't you try working in a different field? And I worked in several different fields. As a matter of fact, my resume looks kind of like I was moving around like crazy, but it was a good resume because it was all about sales, and every one of those sales jobs was commission only, and I followed all the rules of what the company told me, including how to work. And when they told me how to work, it turned out in the long run, they really didn't care how I did it as long as I brought in the money. And that's probably the position that you're in. And if you are in that position, just remember, that's your goal. That is the goal of the marathon you're running month to month, to bring in as much money as you can for the company. Interesting that that's our job. And how do we do that? By seeing people and talking to them. You will never master the art of persuasion if you don't find out what other people are moved by. What are the things that they want? And ironically, they might have an assignment to purchase something that your company sells. But still, when you go see that person, do you notice how they dress, how they talk, how groomed they are? I've met people that you would have thought you were walking into the president of a major university or a major studio. Very, very ego driven. And you could tell because they had pictures of themselves all over the place and their awards scattered everywhere. There's nothing wrong with that. But what it told me and the person that I was training is it told us what moved this guy. And interestingly enough, you could tell by the way we visited him, and when we got into the appointment, the way that he stood over his desk and asked us to sit and insisted that we sit down first before he did. That's kind of a sign of superiority. So we played into his ego. And we're not talking about that this is going to be everybody you run into, but there are going to be those situations. Now, this was a huge company. It wasn't a national known company. As a matter of fact, it had its own niche in the marketplace, but it's a huge company. And when we got in there, we didn't quite know how to handle it. We were kind of winging it and kicking each other under the, under the chair legs. But it turned out that this person was the pivot person that could lead us in the right direction to close the sale of what we wanted to sell for that company, which was this very expensive service. As it turned out, he didn't want to talk to us. He said, you need to talk to my manager, the manager of facilities, and he directed us to the right person. And so we said, can we basically mention that you told us to talk to him? And he said, yeah, you do that. And then we will see, because I'll have the final say. So we said, okay, thank you for your time. And we got out of there, because if we were not spending the rest of the time talking about him and admiring his accomplishments, then we were wasting our time and his. So we got up and left, and we sought his manager that was doing the expediting and doing all of the facilities. And here was another very, very busy person. So now we had to find a way to get his time. But what made the difference is when we told him the name of this CEO by name had told us to talk to him personally and said that he could go back and check with the CEO to see if he said that. And that got us the appointment that we needed. And believe it or not, this took about 2 months to close that sale. But when it did, it gave us an influx of service work that lasted for about a year at a very high price tag. So my commission wasn't too bad either. But I took the owner of the company with me to teach him the sales techniques that he could use from then on, and that his salespeople could learn from. Now, these are not techniques that I created. They came from some of the greatest books I read by some of the great masters, which is why we should always be reading books and learning. We never stop learning, because when we are learning, we're not only increasing our wisdom, we're increasing our tools of capability so that we can become more effective. And I highly recommend that you do the same thing. But when you go out today, see if you can, when you meet with your customers, notice what drives them, and is there any way that you could possibly play to that field, play that play so that you can get them to be more interested. Because when you get them talking and you show interest and you do not interrupt and hold eye contact, then they think you're interesting. Isn't that funny how that works? The person who does the talking and you hardly say anything except for maybe nodding your head, that's the person who thinks you are the interesting one. Try it. It works. Try it with somebody you don't even know, and you will see A whole difference. This is why people tell stories that they're sitting on a park bench and they meet a stranger, and that stranger will tell them things they wouldn't tell their own wives or their own kids or their own spouses or whatever. The same thing happens when people are riding on the subway. They sit down next to somebody, they start talking, next thing you know, that person is telling them things that nobody knows about them. And that's very interesting. Believe it or not, it might not necessarily be anything controversial, but years ago, one of the engineers that we were selling to, it turns out that he was a balloon pilot. Now, that's not really a great thing. That's not a big secret to hide, but nobody knew about it. And a balloon pilot is not necessarily like an airline pilot. I mean, it's something, it's special. The training is completely different, but it was kind of like, wow, that's really interesting. And he's like, would you guys like to go up in the balloon with me? And it turned out that the guy I was with was completely afraid of heights. And we never did get a chance to get it together, but isn't that interesting? Because what it turned into was not only turning this guy into a good customer, but we built a rapport with him. So when I would go visit his office or my coworker, we'd look around, we'd see all the 8x10 color pictures of the balloons that he flew and asked him about all the different festivals and what it's like. And he invited us down to San Diego to one of the balloon festivals that was down there. I don't remember exactly what part of the area is called, but I remember going to this balloon festival, and that was amazing. It was really interesting because you look up and all around you are these big, colorful flying balloons in all kinds of different shapes. It really gave us something to talk about. So when we went back to see him and said, by the way, we went to your festival, it was cool. It was like, well, what do you think of it? Next thing you know, he's talking about himself like crazy. So we found out what turned people on, what their niche was. So remember, take that out today, give it a try, and notice the difference, and come back for the next lesson.